The little black girl told the bikers someone had marked her door last night before vanishing into the darkness. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so, in the small town of Riverton. The usual hum of late-night traffic was absent, leaving only the occasional sound of a passing car. But that stillness was broken when a little black girl, no more than 8 or 9, ran down the road, her feet slapping against the pavement as she hurried toward the biker club's booth at the local carnival. Tears streamed down her face, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She reached the bikers, her voice barely audible over the sound of their motorcycles. "Someone marked my door last night," she cried, pointing toward the darkened street. "I saw them, but they're gone now." The bikers exchanged glances, confused but concerned. They'd been minding their own business, serving food at the carnival for the community outreach event, when this little girl came running toward them. Jack, the leader of the Iron Riders, stepped forward. His face was hard, weathered from years on the road, but something about the girl's terror struck a chord with him. "What do you mean marked?" Jack asked gently, kneeling down to her level. "Who marked your door, sweetheart?" She shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I don't know who they are. But last night, I saw a shadow at my door. And in the morning, there was a weird symbol on it. It looked like a warning." The bikers fell silent. Jack's gaze hardened. There was something familiar about this situation, a feeling that something wasn't right. He'd seen things like this before. People marking doors, leaving signs, and it always ended badly. "Where do you live?" Jack asked, his voice low but steady. The little girl, her eyes wide with fear, pointed toward a row of old houses on the edge of town. "It's not far. It's just down that street," she said, her voice quivering. Jack stood up, his mind racing. Something was wrong, and he wasn't going to ignore it. He turned to the rest of the bikers. "We're going to check this out. Everyone mount up. We're riding out." The engines roared to life, echoing through the quiet night as the Iron Riders began to gather their gear. The little girl watched, her heart racing as the bikers prepared to ride. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The bikers would protect her. They always did. As they pulled away from the carnival grounds, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding into something far darker than they had anticipated. The road ahead was long, the town's lights fading into the distance behind them. They would soon arrive at the girl's house, but what they would find there was anyone's guess. They rode in silence, the only sounds the roar of their engines and the rush of wind as they sped through the night. Jack's mind was already working, analyzing the situation. Who would mark a child's door? And why? His eyes narrowed as he thought of the possibilities. Whatever was waiting for them, he wasn't about to let it slide. This was his town, and no one was going to hurt one of his own. They'd get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. As they neared the girl's neighborhood, the quiet street stretched before them, lined with old, worn houses. The light from their motorcycles illuminated the darkened windows, casting long shadows across the pavement. The girl had stopped talking, but her presence was felt in the air, thick with unspoken fear. Jack signaled to the group to slow down as they approached the house. His eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in every detail, every movement. The house itself stood silent, ominous in the darkness, its windows dark and empty, save for the faintest glimmer of light. "We're here," Jack muttered, his voice tinged with determination. This wasn't over. They would figure out who was behind this and why, and they would stop it before it escalated any further. The Iron Riders rolled through the quiet streets of Riverton, their motorcycles humming in the cool night air. The engines roared louder as they neared the little girl's house. The sound seemed to break the stillness of the night, as if the neighborhood itself had been holding its breath. Jack slowed his bike as they approached the small, run-down house on the corner. It was dark, with only the faintest light glowing from behind drawn curtains. The streetlights were few and far between, and the darkness felt almost thick, as if something was hiding within it. The little girl, whose name was Aisha, had stopped speaking, her eyes wide with terror. She had been clinging to Jack's leather vest, her small fingers shaking as they drove. She had already pointed the way, but now, standing just outside the house, she seemed even smaller, her fear almost palpable. Jack looked over at his crew. They were all seasoned bikers, hardened by years of riding and facing danger, but this felt different. It didn't make sense. Who would target a little girl like this? And why? His mind raced, but he didn't let it show. He turned to Aisha and gave her a reassuring smile, trying to ease the fear in her eyes. "We're going to take care of this," he promised. She nodded, but the uncertainty was still there. Jack could see it in her expression. She was scared, and for good reason. As he walked toward the front door, his boots tapping on the cracked pavement, he gestured for the rest of the crew to follow. They spread out, moving cautiously but with purpose. There was no telling what they were walking into, but Jack knew one thing for sure. No one was going to harm this girl on his watch. As they reached the porch, Jack noticed something strange. The door, which had been solidly shut when they arrived, was now slightly ajar. The faintest light leaked through the gap, casting a long, distorted shadow on the ground. Jack's gut tightened. Something wasn't right. He motioned to Diesel, the largest of the group, to approach. Diesel moved silently, like a shadow, and peered through the crack in the door. He turned back to Jack with a grim look on his face. "No one's inside," Diesel said in a low voice. "But it's like they just vanished." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "Stay alert," he whispered. "We're not leaving until we know what happened here." The crew nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. Jack pushed the door open slowly, trying not to make a sound. The hinges creaked, and the heavy air of the house seemed to push against them as they stepped inside. The smell hit them first. Old wood, stale air, and something else. Something sour. The room was dim, lit only by the faint light coming through the cracked windows. Dust motes floated in the air, and the furniture was old, some of it barely standing. Jack's eyes scanned the room. There was nothing remarkable about it, at least not at first. But the longer he stood there, the more something felt off. Aisha's eyes were darting around the room, her body tense, like she was waiting for something to happen. Jack crouched down next to her, keeping his voice low. "What happened here, Aisha?" he asked gently. "Where did your mom go?" She shook her head, her lip trembling. "I don't know," she whispered. "She was fine this morning. She was just sleeping when I came back. But then I saw the door." Her words trailed off as her gaze shifted to the back of the room. Jack followed her eyes and saw a faint trail of dirt on the floor, leading toward the back hallway. It was like someone had rushed through, leaving only the slightest trace behind. "Show me," Jack said softly. Aisha hesitated, then slowly nodded, her small feet shuffling as she led him down the hall. The others followed, keeping their eyes on the shadows around them. The further they went into the house, the thicker the air became, as if something was pressing down on them from all sides. At the end of the hall, Aisha stopped in front of a closed door. She swallowed hard before pushing it open. Inside was a small bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and dirty, but there was something worse. Something darker. A shadow moved near the window, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, it felt like they were walking straight into a trap. The room seemed colder, and the air felt thicker, like the walls themselves were watching them. Jack stepped forward cautiously, but when he looked inside, he froze. The bed was empty. The room was undisturbed, but the feeling of dread was unmistakable. Jack's eyes narrowed. "There's no one here," he said, but his voice was laced with suspicion. Something wasn't right. Diesel stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the doorway. "This place, it doesn't feel right, Jack," he said, his voice gruff. "We need to get out of here. Now." Jack hesitated, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. But Aisha's voice broke through the tension. "My mom. She's in the basement," she said, barely above a whisper. "She told me to stay upstairs. But I think she needs help." Jack turned to his crew. Without a word, they followed Aisha down into the basement. Every step was a heartbeat, every shadow a potential danger. But they were bikers, and they didn't back down from a fight. Not when it came to family. The basement door creaked as Jack slowly pushed it open. A chill ran down his spine as the cold, damp air hit him. The sound of his boots on the concrete floor echoed through the small, dark space. A faint smell of mold and stale air lingered in the basement, and the low, Flickering light from a single bulb barely illuminated the corners. Aisha's small hand gripped his sleeve, and her trembling voice broke the silence. "She's down here, I know it," she whispered, her wide eyes glancing around nervously. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows. The rest of the bikers were close behind, their eyes sharp, alert to any movement. Diesel, the largest of them all, stepped forward cautiously, his heavy boots making little sound as he walked. Jack raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. "Stay quiet. If there's something wrong, we don't want to alert anyone." The crew nodded in unison, their faces tense with anticipation. As they descended further into the basement, Aisha led them toward the far corner, where an old wooden door stood ajar. The light from above barely reached that part of the room, casting long shadows on the floor. "This is where she is," Aisha said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack took a deep breath, his instincts on high alert. Something about the whole situation felt off, like they were walking into a trap. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning as they moved. Inside, the room was small and cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and what looked like discarded tools. But there, in the middle of the room, on a faded couch, lay Aisha's mother. She was unconscious, her skin pale, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He could see that she was still alive, but barely. Her face was drawn, her eyes closed as if she had been trapped in some sort of deep sleep. The room around her was eerily silent, save for the sound of the creaking floorboards beneath their feet. "She hasn't been eating," said Vince, the club's medic, as he knelt beside her, checking her pulse. His fingers pressed gently against her wrist, his brow furrowing. "She's malnourished, and her breathing is shallow. Whoever left her here didn't care at all." Jack's eyes narrowed as he stood over Aisha's mother, taking in the scene. The room was a mess, but it didn't seem like a random disorder. It was as if someone had been searching for something. "What happened?" Jack asked softly, glancing at Aisha. "What's going on with your mom?" Aisha's lip trembled as she wiped her tear-streaked face. "I don't know," she whispered. "She was fine this morning, but she started acting strange. Then she just fell asleep. I couldn't wake her up." Jack glanced around the room again. The feeling of something being wrong deepened, and his gut told him they weren't just dealing with a simple case of illness. He turned to Diesel and the others. "Search the place. Look for anything unusual." The bikers spread out, moving through the room carefully, lifting boxes and inspecting the floorboards. Jack stayed by Aisha's side, watching her mother intently. The silence in the room was thick, oppressive, and Jack felt a weight pressing on his chest. He didn't like how it felt. Not one bit. "I don't like this," Diesel muttered from across the room, his voice low. "There's something here we're not seeing." Jack's eyes snapped to Diesel. "What do you mean?" Diesel slowly lifted a small, torn piece of paper from beneath a pile of old clothes. He held it up for Jack to see. It was a letter, the ink smudged and faded, but still legible. The message on it sent a chill through Jack's bones. "We know what you're hiding," the letter read, "and we'll be coming for her next." Jack's jaw tightened. The letter was a warning, and it was clear that Aisha's mother had been involved in something far bigger than Jack had imagined. He glanced at Aisha, who was staring at the letter in shock, her face paling. Who sent this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack's mind raced, connecting the dots. The symbol on the door. The disappearance of Aisha's mother. The letter. It was all starting to make sense now. Someone was after them. Someone dangerous. "We need to get her out of here," Jack said, his voice firm. He turned to Vince, who was still kneeling by Aisha's mother. "Can she move? Can she travel?" Vince looked up, his face grim. "She's too weak. She can't be moved until we get her some proper care." Jack cursed under his breath. He didn't want to stay here longer than necessary, but there was no other choice. They couldn't leave without making sure Aisha's mom was safe. "We need to stay put until we figure out who's behind this," Jack said, his voice low and determined. He turned to the rest of the crew. "Keep watch. We'll figure this out, but we need to be careful. Whoever did this is still out there." The bikers spread out, taking their positions to guard the house. Jack stood by the door, his eyes scanning the darkness outside, his mind working overtime to piece everything together. The night had only just begun, and it was clear that the danger wasn't over yet. Something far more sinister was lurking in the shadows, and Jack was determined to find out what it was before it was too late. The silence in the basement was deafening. Jack stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the dark, cluttered room, his thoughts racing. Aisha's mother was still unconscious on the couch, her breathing shallow, barely perceptible. Vince, the club's medic, was doing his best to stabilize her, but it was clear she needed more help than they could provide in this abandoned house. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. The bikers stood alert, each man keeping watch, eyes darting between the shadows. Outside, the night was still, but Jack knew that stillness could change in an instant. The letter they had found earlier, the one warning them about what they were hiding, kept playing over in his mind. It was more than a threat. It was a message. Whoever was behind this, whoever had targeted Aisha and her family, wasn't finished. Jack's instincts were on high alert. He could feel something coming, something worse than he'd imagined. He turned to Diesel, who was leaning against the doorframe, eyes scanning the street outside. "What do you think?" Jack asked quietly. Diesel looked up, his expression unreadable. "I don't like it, Jack. This feels like more than just a random attack. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Jack nodded. "We're not leaving until we find out who's behind this. We need to protect Aisha. She's been through enough." The little girl was sitting quietly in the corner, her legs drawn up to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't said a word since they entered the house. Jack walked over to her, crouching down so he was at eye level. "Aisha, listen to me. We're going to keep you safe. I promise." Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of hope, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. "They're going to come back, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack's heart tightened at the fear in her voice. "We're going to make sure they don't," he replied firmly. He wasn't about to let anyone harm this little girl, not while he had breath in his body. As he stood up, his eyes lingered on Aisha for a moment longer, then turned to the rest of the crew. "We need to move fast. I'm not waiting around for whoever did this to make another move. We need to find out who they are." He turned to Vince. "How's she doing?" Vince looked up from the mother's side. "She's stable for now, but it's hard to say how much longer she'll stay that way. We need to get her to a hospital, Jack." Jack clenched his jaw. "We're not leaving yet. We're getting answers first." Diesel stepped forward. "We'll keep watch. If anyone comes near, we'll be ready." Jack nodded, grateful for the loyalty of his crew. "Good. Stay sharp." As the bikers spread out, Jack's thoughts turned to the letter again. The more he thought about it, the more it didn't sit right with him. Who would mark a little girl's door, then leave a letter like that behind? It didn't add up. It was as if someone wanted them to follow a trail, to go deeper into whatever twisted game they were playing. He looked over at Aisha's mother. She was still unconscious, but the signs of distress were clear: pale skin, shallow breathing, and a strange, almost unnatural stillness. There was something more to this. Jack's gut told him it wasn't just random violence. This was something personal. Someone had targeted this family specifically. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They weren't just dealing with a random act of violence. This was something far more calculated. The question was, who wanted Aisha's family so badly? Jack took a deep breath and turned to the crew. "All right, listen up. We're not leaving until we figure out who's behind this. Diesel, you stay here with Vince and keep an eye on the mother. The rest of us are going to check out the neighborhood. We'll cover as much ground as we can. If anyone knows something, they're going to tell us." Diesel nodded, his face hard. "Got it, boss." Jack turned to Aisha, who was still sitting in the corner, her wide eyes watching him. "Stay here with Diesel, okay? We'll be back soon." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jack felt a pang of guilt, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had a job to do. The bikers split up, moving out into the night. Jack led the way, his heart racing as he moved through the quiet streets. Every step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of the world was pushing down on him. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning every shadow, every movement. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. The silence in the air felt oppressive. As they reached the corner of the street, Jack stopped, holding up his hand to signal the others to stop. "This is where it starts," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see who's been watching us." The crew spread out again, moving into position. Jack's pulse quickened as he approached the house across the street. The faint glow of a streetlight revealed a dark figure standing just inside the doorway. Someone was watching them. and they were waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack's eyes narrowed. He had a feeling the answers they were looking for were just beyond that door. The tension in the air was thick as Jack and his crew approached the house across the street. The streetlights flickered above them, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Jack's heart raced as he moved forward, his boots making barely a sound on the ground. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, like the silence before a storm. The figure standing in the doorway of the house across the street had caught Jack's attention. They were watching them, waiting for the right moment. Jack could feel it in his bones that something was off. He motioned for the crew to stay low, his eyes fixed on the figure. The man in the doorway had his back to them, but Jack could see the faint outline of a cigarette dangling from his lips. The glow of the cigarette illuminated his face for a split second, and Jack's blood ran cold. It was one of the men who had been at the carnival earlier that night. The one who had been watching Aisha. "Stay here," Jack whispered to the rest of the crew. "I'll take care of this." He moved forward, slowly, quietly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the sound of his own breathing, the world around him growing smaller, quieter, until all he could focus on was the man in front of him. He reached the edge of the house and stopped, peering around the corner. The man in the doorway was still there, his back turned. Jack took a deep breath, then stepped out of the shadows. "Hey," Jack said, his voice low but steady. The man stiffened, then turned around, his face frozen in shock. He hadn't expected anyone to approach him, especially not this fast. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice rough and defensive. "Just having a little chat," Jack replied, taking a step closer. The man's eyes flickered to the side, then back to Jack. Jack could see the fear in his eyes, but the man wasn't going to back down. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man said, his tone defensive. Jack didn't buy it. "You were at the carnival tonight, watching Aisha," Jack said, his voice cold. "I'm guessing you're the one who marked her door." The man's face twitched, and for a split second, Jack saw the guilt in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man repeated, his voice shaking. "I didn't mark any door." Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. "I know you did, and I know why you're here. This isn't some random act. You're here for something bigger." The man's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but Jack was blocking the only way out. "You need to leave. Now," the man said, his voice trembling. "This is none of your business." Jack shook his head, not buying the man's lies. "You're making it my business," he said. "Who are you working for?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back, his hand going to his waistband. Jack's instincts kicked in. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it, forcing the man to drop whatever he was reaching for. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said, his voice low and threatening. "You're going to tell me everything." The man winced in pain, but didn't fight back. Jack could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the situation settling in. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Who's behind this?" Jack demanded, his grip tightening. The man's eyes shifted nervously, and for a moment, Jack thought he might crack. But then, he shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just told to do my part," the man said, his voice breaking. Jack's patience was running thin. "Who told you?" he pressed. The man hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, he spoke. "It's not just us. There's a bigger group. A group that's been watching Aisha for a long time." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he demanded. "Who's behind this?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the side. "I can't say. They'll kill me." Jack's grip tightened. "You tell me everything, or I'll make sure they never get the chance to kill you." The man's eyes flickered with fear, and for the first time, Jack saw the truth in his eyes. "I can't," the man whispered, barely audible. "You don't understand. They're too dangerous." Jack clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to get anything more from this guy. He shoved him against the wall, making sure the man couldn't move. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stay out of our way. We'll take care of the rest," Jack said. The man nodded weakly, his eyes filled with fear. Jack turned on his heel, signaling for the rest of the crew to move in. As they left the house, Jack's mind raced. There was a bigger picture here, and Aisha's family was caught in the middle of it. Whoever was behind this, whoever had been watching them, wasn't done yet. And Jack was determined to make sure they didn't get away with it. The night felt colder as Jack and his crew made their way back to the house. The weight of the man's words, The cryptic message about a bigger group behind all of this hung heavily in the air. They had expected danger, but nothing had prepared them for the realization that this wasn't just a random act of violence. Someone was orchestrating it all, pulling the strings from the shadows. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that they had been for some time now. He looked over at Diesel, whose usually calm demeanor had been replaced with a rare tension. "This isn't just about Aisha or her mom," Jack muttered under his breath. Diesel nodded, his eyes scanning the street as they walked. "No, it's bigger than that. Whoever they are, they've been planning this for a while. This is just the beginning." Jack's mind raced. He couldn't figure out why Aisha's family was being targeted, but he knew it had something to do with that symbol on the door, the letter they had found, and now, the mysterious group behind it all. "We need more answers," Jack said, his voice firm. "Let's check the rest of the neighborhood. Whoever's behind this has to be close." The crew nodded in agreement, and they split up, covering the area carefully. Jack walked through the quiet streets, his thoughts heavy. It didn't take long before his instincts kicked in. Something was off. The streets were too quiet. The few houses they passed had lights off, curtains drawn, and no sign of life. It was like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for something. Jack felt his hand instinctively go to the grip of his motorcycle. He didn't like the silence. It was unnatural. As they continued down the road, Jack's thoughts turned to Aisha. He hadn't seen a child that scared in a long time. The trauma she had experienced. The way her eyes had darted around, looking for someone to protect her, it haunted him. She was just a little girl, and yet, she had been thrown into this twisted game. He couldn't let that go. He had made a promise to her father, and he was going to keep it. They wouldn't rest until this was over. They couldn't. As the crew moved into position, Jack reached the corner of the street and froze. Up ahead, he saw a car parked under a streetlight, its engine running. The headlights cast long shadows on the pavement, but there was no movement inside. Jack's senses went on high alert. "Stay back," Jack whispered into his microphone. The crew stopped, their eyes narrowing as they followed Jack's lead. He moved closer to the car, his boots silent against the pavement. The car was familiar. It had been the same one they had seen earlier, the silver SUV, the one Aisha had pointed out. But now, it was parked and empty. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He didn't like this. Something was wrong. He approached the car carefully, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The area was still, eerily still. He tapped the side window, trying to catch a glimpse of anything that could give him a clue. As he reached for the handle, the sound of a door opening behind him made his heart race. He turned just in time to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a man dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by a hood. "You're in the wrong place," the man said, his voice low and menacing. Jack's jaw tightened. "And you're in the way." Without another word, Jack lunged forward, grabbing the man by the collar and slamming him against the car. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice cold. The man struggled, but Jack's grip was unrelenting. "Tell me what you're doing here." The man's eyes widened with fear, and he gasped for air. "I'm just doing my job. They'll kill me if I say anything," he stammered. Jack's grip tightened. "Who are they? What do they want with Aisha's family?" The man's eyes darted to the street, his gaze frantic. I can't tell you," he whimpered. Jack was done playing games. "You don't have a choice," he said. "You talk, or you don't walk away from this." The man froze, fear overtaking him. He looked at Jack for a long moment, then finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "The Serpents. It's them. They're behind everything." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The Serpents. He had heard the name before, an outlaw motorcycle club with a notorious reputation. They were ruthless, dangerous, and had their fingers in every shady deal imaginable. "What do they want with Aisha's family?" Jack demanded. The man shook his head, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but they're coming for you next. All of you. You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Jack's blood ran cold. He knew the name, but this was different. This wasn't just about a rival club. This was something personal, something much bigger than he had anticipated. The man's words lingered in the air, heavy and ominous. Jack didn't wait any longer. He shoved the man away, watching as he stumbled backward, before turning on his heel and signaling for the crew to regroup. "Let's go. We're getting out of here." They needed to move fast. The Serpents were coming, and Jack wasn't about to let them take down Aisha's family or his crew. The bikers mounted their motorcycles and revved their engines, ready for what was coming next. Jack could feel the tension rising in the air, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on him. Whoever the Serpents were, they weren't going to be easy to stop. But Jack had a crew that wasn't afraid of anyone, and they weren't about to back down now. The sound of roaring engines filled the air as Jack and his crew sped down the empty streets. The city was still, like a pressure cooker waiting to explode, and Jack's instincts told him that they were on the brink of something big. The Serpents, the motorcycle gang that had been behind all of this, weren't just coming for Aisha's family. They were coming for them all. The realization made Jack's grip on the handlebars tighten. They were no longer just a group of bikers riding for justice. Now they were a target, too. The streets of Riverton were quiet, almost too quiet. Jack felt the tension in the air as they made their way through the neighborhood. His mind kept racing. How had the Serpents found Aisha's family? What did they want with them? And why had they been marking the door? The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up, but the answers still seemed just out of reach. We need to make sure they don't get to her first, Jack muttered, looking over at Diesel, who was riding close beside him. Diesel nodded, his face grim. We've got this, Jack. We won't let them take her. The other bikers, spread out in a tight formation, all rode with purpose. They knew what was at stake, and they weren't about to back down now. As they approached the outskirts of town, the sound of their engines seemed to grow louder, almost like a warning to anyone who might be watching. Jack's mind raced as they neared the old warehouse on the edge of town, a place the Serpents had been known to use for their shady dealings. This is it, Jack said, his voice steady but full of resolve. They're here, and we're going to put an end to this. Diesel pulled his bike up alongside Jack's. You ready for this, boss? Jack looked over at him, his jaw set. We don't have a choice. We need to move fast. Get in, find out what's going on, and get out before they realize we're here. The crew all nodded in agreement, and they rolled into position, circling the warehouse like wolves closing in on their prey. The building loomed in the distance, its windows dark, the entrance guarded by a few trucks. Jack could see the faint outline of a figure standing just inside the door, watching them. He motioned for the crew to hold back and slipped off his bike, moving silently toward the entrance. The rest of the crew followed, staying low, ready for anything. As they neared the warehouse, the night air grew colder, and Jack felt the weight of the situation settle over him. Every step they took felt like a step into unknown danger, but he wasn't about to stop now. They had come this far, and they couldn't turn back. Jack reached the door and pushed it open slowly, trying not to make a sound. The dim light from inside barely illuminated the space, but Jack could make out the shadows of several figures inside, moving in and out of view. He held his breath, listening for any sign of trouble. The air was thick with tension, and Jack's instinct screamed that something was wrong. He motioned for Diesel to take the left, while he moved to the right. The rest of the crew spread out, covering every angle. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each biker knowing their place. Inside, the air was musty, the smell of old wood and oil hanging in the air. Jack's eyes scanned the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The figures inside were talking in low voices, but Jack couldn't make out the words. He crept forward, inching closer to the group, his senses on high alert. And then he saw it. A large metal crate sitting in the corner of the room, covered in tarp. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the thing they had been looking for. Whatever was inside that crate, it was the reason Aisha's family had been targeted. Jack's mind raced. He had to find out what it was, but he needed to be careful. The last thing they needed was a confrontation right now. He motioned for Diesel to join him, and together they approached the crate. The rest of the crew kept their eyes on the other figures in the room, ensuring they weren't interrupted. Jack pulled the tarp off slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. Inside the crate, there was nothing but a stack of documents and a few old crates. But as Jack picked up the first piece of paper, he realized it wasn't just any paperwork. It was detailed, confidential information. This is it, Jack muttered under his breath. They've been after these documents. Diesel stepped closer, his eyes scanning the papers. What are they planning to do with these? He asked. Jack shook his head. I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out. They had what they needed. Now, they just had to get out of there before things got worse. Just as Jack turned to leave, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Jack's eyes shot to the door as two men stepped into view. their faces hidden in the shadows. They had been caught. There was no turning back now. "Get out!" Jack shouted to the crew, but it was too late. The doors to the warehouse slammed shut, trapping them inside. The bikers were surrounded. The fight was on. The air in the warehouse was thick with tension as Jack and his crew stood frozen, surrounded by the Serpents. The sound of their motorcycles echoed through the cold concrete walls, but it wasn't the comforting hum of their engines. It was the sound of impending danger. The warehouse doors slammed shut behind them, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation closing in. They were trapped. Two men stepped out from the shadows, their faces hidden behind dark hoods. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, and Jack knew right away they weren't ordinary thugs. These men were part of the Serpents, dangerous and ruthless. "Didn't expect you to be so quick," one of the men sneered, his voice cold and mocking. "Thought you'd be running scared by now." Jack's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. The crew was spread out, ready for anything, but Jack could tell the situation was about to escalate. "We're not going anywhere," Jack said firmly, his voice steady despite the tension. "We have what we need. So why don't you step aside and let us walk out of here?" The second man stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You really think you can just take what's ours and leave?" he growled. "You've made a big mistake, buddy." Jack's grip tightened on his bike's handlebar, his mind racing. They couldn't afford to let this turn into a full-on fight. They needed to get out, and they needed to do it fast. "We're not here to fight," Jack said, his voice still calm. "But if you don't let us go, this will get ugly for you." The first man laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You think we're afraid of you?" He signaled behind him, and suddenly, more figures appeared from the shadows, at least 5 more Serpents, all armed and ready for a confrontation. Jack's stomach sank. They were outnumbered, but they weren't going down without a fight. "Get ready," Jack shouted to his crew. It was too late to back out now. Diesel, who was always calm under pressure, pulled out his knife, his eyes locked on one of the Serpents. "You picked the wrong night, buddy," Diesel muttered. The others weren't far behind, pulling out their weapons, preparing for the inevitable clash. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jack knew they had to strike fast and hit hard. One of the Serpents lunged forward, swinging a bat at Jack's head, but Jack was quicker. He ducked, sidestepping the blow, and landed a punch right in the man's stomach. The Serpent grunted, stumbling backward, but the fight didn't stop there. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Bikers and Serpents clashed, fists flying, knives flashing in the dim light. The sound of metal scraping against concrete filled the air as the battle unfolded around them. Jack and Diesel worked in sync, taking down their opponents with precision. Jack's mind was focused, his body moving on instinct. He had been in enough fights to know how to handle himself, but this wasn't just any fight. This was personal. The Serpents had messed with the wrong people. Jack and his crew weren't about to let them win. As the battle raged on, Jack caught sight of Aisha's mother, still unconscious on the other side of the room. The last thing he needed was for her to get caught up in this mess. He made his way toward her, dodging punches and kicks from the Serpents as he went. When he reached her, he quickly checked her vitals. She was still breathing, but she was barely hanging on. "We need to move her," Jack muttered to himself, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the fight wasn't spilling over. He didn't have much time. The Serpents were too close. Diesel appeared at his side, his fists covered in blood. "I've got her," Diesel said, nodding to the unconscious woman. He scooped her up effortlessly, his muscles rippling under the strain. Jack quickly turned back to the fight, scanning for any signs of movement. The rest of the crew was holding their own, but they were tiring. They needed to get out now. Jack raised his voice, trying to rally his crew. "Time to go," he shouted. "Everyone fall back." The bikers responded immediately, moving toward the exit, pushing through the Serpents as they went. Jack kept a watchful eye on the fight, making sure no one was left behind. They needed to escape before the situation escalated even further. They reached the door, and Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked it open, the sound of splintering wood ringing through the air. As they made their way outside, Jack could feel the cool night air against his skin. They had made it out, but the battle wasn't over yet. The Serpents were still out there, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The crew piled onto their bikes, revving the engines as they prepared to leave. Jack gave one last look at the warehouse, his heart pounding in his chest. They had what they came for, but it had cost them. The Serpents wouldn't forget this. Jack looked at Diesel, who was still holding Aisha's mother, his face hard with resolve. "We're not done yet," Jack said. "We'll finish this. But first, we get Aisha and her mom somewhere safe." The rest of the crew nodded in agreement. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, and they would fight to the end. The engines roared to life as Jack and his crew sped down the deserted highway, the cold night air whipping past them. Aisha's mother was unconscious in Diesel's arms, her fragile body still barely clinging to life. The rest of the crew was close behind, each biker tense, their faces hard with resolve. They had gotten out of the warehouse, but the Serpents were still lurking in the shadows, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they would come after them again. As they rode, Jack's mind raced. He needed to get Aisha and her mother somewhere safe, away from the chaos that was closing in on them. The fight wasn't over, and he wasn't about to let his crew, or this family, fall into the hands of the Serpents. Diesel glanced over at Jack, his expression unreadable behind his helmet. "We need to get her to a hospital," Diesel said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. Jack nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know, but we can't risk being followed. We'll get her to safety first, then worry about the rest." The rest of the crew nodded in agreement, and they picked up speed, heading toward a remote cabin on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect place to lay low, far enough from the city to avoid detection, but close enough that they could get help if needed. They reached the cabin after what felt like hours, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground as they parked their bikes outside. Jack jumped off his bike and rushed to Diesel's side, helping him gently carry Aisha's mother into the cabin. The others followed, staying on high alert. Inside, the cabin was dark and quiet, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floors as they moved through the rooms. Jack set Aisha's mother down on a worn couch, his heart heavy with worry. "Stay here, Diesel," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts raging in his head. "I'll go get some supplies from the truck. We need to keep her stable." Diesel nodded, his face grim. "I've got it under control. You be quick." Jack hurried back outside, his boots thudding heavily on the porch. The night was still, the only sound the distant chirp of crickets. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the Serpents were already closing in on them. He grabbed the medical supplies from the truck and rushed back inside, his heart pounding in his chest. As he entered the cabin, he noticed Aisha sitting in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. She hadn't spoken much since they arrived, but Jack could tell that she was scared. She was just a little girl, but the horrors she had already witnessed were more than most adults would ever face in a lifetime. "Aisha," Jack said softly, his voice gentle. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of your mom, okay?" Aisha nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Will she be okay?" she whispered. Jack knelt down beside her, trying to reassure her. "We're doing everything we can. She's a fighter." Aisha didn't respond, but Jack could see the worry in her eyes. He could only imagine what she had been through. The sound of a bike engine in the distance made Jack freeze. His senses were on high alert. He motioned for Diesel to stay low, then stepped toward the window, peering out into the night. The headlights of a motorcycle appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Jack's pulse quickened. They were here. The Serpents were closing in. "Get ready," Jack muttered under his breath. He motioned for the crew to take positions, their eyes scanning the surroundings, waiting for any sign of movement. The engine grew louder, closer. Jack could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was coming bearing down on him. He knew this wasn't just another fight. This was a battle for survival. The motorcycle came into view, its headlights blinding in the darkness. Jack's grip tightened on the handle of his bike, his mind racing. The figure on. The motorcycle slowed as it reached the cabin, and Jack's heart skipped a beat when he recognized the rider. It was one of the Serpents. He had come to finish what they started. The man dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Jack stepped out from the cabin, his eyes locked on the man. "You really thought you could just walk away from this?" The Serpent sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Jack didn't flinch. "We're not running," he said coldly. "And we're not backing down." The Serpent grinned, pulling a knife from his belt. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, stepping forward. Jack's eyes never left the man's face as he reached for his own weapon. The rest of the crew moved into position, their eyes fixed on the Serpent, ready for the fight. But Jack wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. This was personal. The man lunged at Jack, his knife aimed straight for his chest. Jack sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The serpent grunted in pain, but Jack didn't let up. "You're not getting away," Jack growled, his voice low and menacing. The serpent struggled, trying to break free, but Jack had him pinned. Diesel stepped forward, his eyes cold. "We're done here," Diesel said, his voice quiet but firm. Jack nodded. "We'll deal with him later. Let's get Aisha and her mom out of here." The serpent growled in frustration, but he knew he wasn't going anywhere. Jack motioned for the crew to move, and they quickly loaded Aisha's mother into the truck. The night was far from over, but Jack was determined to get them to safety. The serpents had come for them, but they hadn't counted on Jack and his crew. The war had just begun. The truck rumbled down the road as Jack and his crew sped away from the cabin, the cold night air rushing past them. The sense of urgency had never been more pressing. They had Aisha's mother secured in the back of the truck, but there was no time to relax. The serpents were still out there, hunting them, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to make their move. He glanced back at Diesel, who was keeping a close eye on Aisha's mother, her fragile body still limp from the fight and the trauma. "She's not doing well, Jack," Diesel said, his voice grim. "We need to get her to a hospital. The longer we wait, the worse it gets." Jack nodded, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "I know. We're almost there." He pushed the truck harder, his foot pressing down on the gas pedal. They had a safe house in the next town over, a place they had used before, and that's where they needed to go now. Aisha was silent beside him, her small frame curled up in the seat, her eyes wide and full of fear. Jack's heart ached for her. No child should have to go through what she was experiencing. It was one thing to be the target of the serpents, but to have your family torn apart like this was another thing entirely. "We're gonna make sure you and your mom are safe, Aisha," Jack said, his voice soft but firm. "This will all be over soon." Aisha nodded, but the fear in her eyes told Jack that she wasn't so sure. He couldn't blame her. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and she had no idea what was coming next. But Jack had to believe that they could protect her. He had to believe that they could stop the serpents before it was too late. The truck bounced over the rough road, the tires kicking up dirt behind them. As they neared the edge of town, Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. They were getting closer to safety. But just as the feeling of calm began to settle in, Jack saw the headlights in the rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat. The familiar silver SUV was trailing them. "They're following us," Jack muttered, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. Diesel's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "How many are there?" "One," Jack said, his voice cold. "But that doesn't matter. We need to lose them, now." Jack slammed his foot down on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward as the engine roared. The SUV behind them sped up as well, matching their pace. The road ahead was long and winding, but Jack knew they couldn't outrun them forever. "Hold on," Jack shouted to the crew. "We're about to make a move." He swerved the truck sharply to the left, taking a side road that cut through the woods. The trees on either side of the road closed in, blocking the view, but Jack knew it wouldn't be enough to lose the serpents. The SUV followed closely behind, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. Jack took another sharp turn, sending the truck skidding on the dirt road. The tires screeched, but he managed to keep control, pushing the truck even faster. The sound of the SUV's engine grew louder, its headlights getting closer with every passing second. Jack could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. This was it. The chase was on. He could hear the tires of the SUV sliding on the gravel behind him. The serpents weren't going to give up easily, but neither was Jack. He had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it now. The road ahead curved sharply, and Jack's mind raced. He had to think fast. The next turn was coming up, and it was a tight one. He could hear the SUV's engine roaring as it closed the distance. Jack took the corner at full speed, the truck sliding dangerously close to the edge of the road. His heart pounded in his chest as he fought to keep the vehicle under control. He glanced at Diesel, who was gripping the seat beside him, his eyes focused on the rearview mirror. "We can't keep this up forever," Diesel said, his voice tense. "We need to get rid of them." Jack's mind worked quickly. There was only one way to shake them off, and it was risky. He gripped the wheel tighter. "Get ready," he said. He took another sharp turn, sending the truck onto an even narrower path. The Serpents' SUV followed, its headlights gleaming in the distance. Jack didn't hesitate. As soon as they hit a steep incline, he slammed on the brakes, sending the truck skidding to a halt. The SUV, too focused on the chase, didn't see it coming. It slammed into the back of the truck, the sound of crunching metal filling the air. Jack wasted no time. He threw the truck in reverse, slamming into the SUV with a jarring impact. The vehicle behind them jerked, and Jack could hear the tires screech as the Serpents tried to regain control. "Go!" Jack shouted, urging Diesel to move. Diesel jumped out of the truck with Aisha's mother in his arms, and the rest of the crew followed, heading for the trees. Jack wasn't far behind, his heart racing as he ran toward the cover of the woods. The sound of the crash echoed through the night, but Jack didn't look back. They had no time to waste. They had to get Aisha's mother to safety, and they had to do it now. As they disappeared into the trees, Jack glanced over his shoulder. The Serpents had been thrown off for now, but he knew this wasn't over. The fight was just beginning, and the Serpents wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But Jack wasn't going to let that happen. Not while he still had breath in his body. The woods were dark, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their boots and the distant rumble of engines. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as they moved quickly, but carefully, through the trees. The Serpents had been temporarily thrown off track, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped and came after them. The cold night air bit at his skin, and the weight of what was happening pressed down on him. Aisha's mother was still unconscious, barely holding on, and Jack had no idea how much longer they could stay hidden before the Serpents found them again. Diesel was in the lead, carrying Aisha's mother with ease despite the strain of the situation. The crew followed close behind, staying low, eyes constantly scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Aisha was beside Jack, still quiet, her small hand gripping his sleeve as if she was afraid to let go. Jack glanced down at her, his heart aching. No child should have to go through this. He couldn't imagine the fear she was feeling right now. Her entire world had been turned upside down, and the people she trusted were all doing their best to protect her. But Jack knew that even their best might not be enough if the Serpents found them. They had to get to safety. They had to make sure Aisha's mother got the medical care she needed before it was too late. The path through the woods was narrow, and Jack's eyes were constantly darting back to make sure no one was following them. The last thing they needed was to be caught out here in the open. Jack's mind raced with questions. Why had the Serpents targeted Aisha's family? What did they want? And why had they gone so far as to mark their door and send those cryptic messages? Every answer seemed to raise more questions, and Jack knew they had to get to the bottom of it. The only way to do that was to keep moving forward. As they reached the edge of the woods, Jack could see the faint outline of the safe house in the distance. It was a small cabin, isolated from the rest of the town, a place where they could lay low and regroup. Jack motioned for the crew to pick up the pace. They had to get there before the Serpents found them. Diesel didn't break stride as he carried Aisha's mother toward the cabin. Jack stayed close behind, making sure Aisha was safe and that the crew was staying together. The safe house was just ahead, but Jack could feel the weight of the moment. They were getting closer, but the danger wasn't over yet. The Serpents were relentless, and Jack knew they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. As they neared the cabin, Jack felt a sudden sense of relief. They had made it. For now. But as they reached the door, Jack stopped in his tracks. He could hear something in the distance, footsteps, low and steady, moving through the trees. His heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. "Stay back," Jack whispered to the crew, his voice low but firm. He motioned for them to hide behind the trees, his instincts telling him they were being watched. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Jack's mind raced as he looked around. They were exposed. If the Serpents had tracked them this far, they would be in serious trouble. Diesel and the others stayed hidden, but Jack knew they couldn't stay like this forever. He had to act. As the footsteps came closer, Jack's hand went to his knife, the cold steel a comfort in his grip. He stepped forward, moving silently through the trees, keeping low to the ground. The air was thick with tension. Jack's heart was pounding, every nerve in his body alert. He could see the outline of a figure moving in the shadows, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they were face to face with the enemy. The figure stopped, just a few yards ahead, and Jack froze. The moonlight revealed a man, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was wearing the distinctive leather jacket of the Serpents. Jack's pulse quickened. This was it. They had found them. The man stepped forward, his eyes scanning the area. He was alone, but Jack knew better than to think they were safe. More were bound to be close behind. The man's voice broke the silence, low and menacing. You think you can just disappear? He sneered. Jack didn't flinch, his hand tight around the knife. You're not taking anyone else, Jack said, his voice cold and resolute. The man smirked, his eyes narrowing. We'll see about that, he muttered. Jack lunged forward, catching the man off guard. The fight was quick and brutal. The man tried to raise his weapon, but Jack was faster, taking him down with a swift strike to the stomach. The serpent gasped, falling to the ground with a grunt. Jack stood over him, breathing heavily, his mind still racing. Stay down, Jack growled, his eyes hard. The man groaned, clutching his stomach, but Jack didn't give him the chance to recover. He grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him into the woods. Tell me what you know about Aisha's family, Jack demanded. The man's eyes flickered with fear, but he didn't speak. Jack tightened his grip. I'm not asking again. The man's expression darkened. You won't get anything from me, he spat, but Jack could see the fear in his eyes. Jack knew they needed answers, and this was the only way to get them. He wasn't about to let this man walk away, not after everything they had been through. Tell me who's in charge, Jack said, his voice steady. Who's pulling the strings? The man's lips curled into a snarl. You'll never know, he said, his voice filled with venom. Jack could feel his patience wearing thin. But just as he was about to press further, the sound of approaching motorcycles filled the air. More serpents were coming. And Jack knew this wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a war. The sound of motorcycles grew louder, closer, and Jack's heart rate spiked as he stood over the serpent, holding him tight by the collar. The man groaned in pain, but there was no time for pity. Jack's crew needed to move fast before the rest of the serpents caught up. He knew they didn't have much time. He shot a glance at Diesel, who was still holding Aisha's unconscious mother in his arms. The tension was thick, and Jack could feel the clock ticking. Tell me who's in charge, Jack demanded again, his voice cold, his patience thinning. The serpent's eyes flickered with fear, but he said nothing. The roar of the approaching bikes was getting louder, and Jack had no choice but to push the man harder. If you don't talk, I'll make you wish you had, Jack warned. The serpent sneered, still defiant, but his eyes betrayed his fear. You're wasting your time, he hissed. The serpents control everything around here. You think you're going to stop us? You're nothing. Just as Jack was about to press further, the sound of the bikes reached a crescendo. They were close now. Too close. We need to go now, Diesel shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. Jack didn't wait for the man to respond. He shoved him away, letting the serpent crumple to the ground with a heavy thud. Jack motioned for the crew to move. Let's go? Now. With no time to lose, they all rushed to the truck where Aisha's mother was resting. Diesel climbed in first, securing her carefully, making sure she was as comfortable as possible despite the rough circumstances. Jack slammed the truck door shut, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The serpents were closing in, and Jack knew they were running out of options. He jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the engine into gear. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the dirt road. The sound of the motorcycles followed them, and Jack knew that the serpents wouldn't let them go easily. Hold on, Jack shouted. As he pushed the gas pedal to the floor, the truck speeding down the road. Behind them, the roar of the serpents' engines echoed, and Jack could see the headlights of the bikes getting closer. The chase was on. They had to outrun them, or they wouldn't make it. Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror as he swerved around the corner, narrowly missing a large tree. The serpents were relentless, and he had no doubt they were following every turn, every move. He glanced over at Diesel, whose face was set with grim determination. We need to find a way to lose them, Jack said through gritted teeth. Diesel nodded, his jaw clenched. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves, he replied, his voice low. Jack didn't need to be told twice. They had to act fast. Jack swerved the truck onto a narrow path that led through the woods, the tires crunching on the gravel. The trees whipped by as he took the sharp curves, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He could feel the serpents getting closer, their bikes thundering behind them. Jack knew the only way to escape was to get them off their tail, and the woods were the only place he could think of that might give them an advantage. We need to split up, Jack said, his voice tense. You take the truck. The rest of us will head on foot and try to lose them in the trees. Diesel nodded, the plan already forming in his head. Got it. Let's go. They quickly scrambled out of the truck and split into two groups. Jack's crew ran in different directions, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. Diesel stayed behind, carefully driving the truck further down the winding path, hoping to lead the Serpents in the wrong direction. Jack's heart raced as they moved through the trees. His instincts told him they were being watched, but he refused to let fear control him. They had a mission to complete, and they couldn't afford to be caught now. Aisha's safety and her mother's life depended on it. As they moved deeper into the woods, Jack could hear the engines of the motorcycles getting fainter. They were being thrown off track. The plan was working. He signaled for his crew to slow down and take cover. The trees around them were dense, and they had to stay hidden until the Serpents passed. Jack crouched low behind a large oak tree, his eyes peering through the shadows. He could see the headlights of the motorcycles in the distance, weaving through the trees, trying to track them down. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Jack knew they had to remain completely still. One wrong move, and they would be caught. As the motorcycles neared, Jack's crew held their breath, staying as quiet as possible. The Serpents passed them by, their engines roaring, unaware that Jack and his crew were just feet away, hidden in the dark. Jack let out a quiet breath of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. They couldn't stop here. They had to keep moving. They had to make sure they lost the Serpents for good. Jack stood up, motioning for his crew to follow him. Let's move, he said, his voice low but determined. The Serpents might have been close, but Jack wasn't about to let them win. The night was far from over, and the real fight was just beginning. The night was still, the woods thick with shadows as Jack and his crew made their way deeper into the forest. The Serpents had passed them by, but the danger wasn't over. They had no idea where the Serpents were now, but they knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Jack felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, the uncertainty of what would happen next gnawing at him. He had made a promise to Aisha's father, and he wasn't about to break it. As the crew moved cautiously through the forest, Jack's thoughts raced. They had made it this far, but the Serpents were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and Jack couldn't allow that. We need to keep moving, Jack said, his voice low but determined. Diesel, still carrying Aisha's mother, nodded, his face grim. We can't risk being followed again, Diesel said. We need to get to the cabin. Jack glanced back at Aisha, who was walking quietly beside him, her eyes wide with fear. She had barely said a word since the chase, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She was scared, and rightfully so. She had already seen too much, and now her mother was barely clinging to life. Jack wasn't going to let anything happen to her. We're almost there, Aisha, Jack said gently, trying to reassure her. You're safe now. Aisha didn't respond, but she clung to his sleeve, her grip tight. Jack could feel the weight of her fear, the way she was holding on to him like he was her only lifeline. It made his heart ache. As they approached the cabin, Jack motioned for the crew to slow down. He could see the faint glow of light through the windows, a sign that they had made it. The crew was exhausted, but they couldn't stop now. The Serpents could be out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jack couldn't let his guard down. We're not safe yet, Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Stay alert. Diesel nodded, his eyes sharp as he looked around. We'll take shifts. Keep watch while the rest of us get some rest. Jack agreed. They couldn't afford to be complacent. The Serpents were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. As the crew entered the cabin, Jack quickly checked the perimeter before locking the door. Diesel set Aisha's mother down on the couch, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. She's hanging on, but we need to get her proper care soon, Diesel said, his voice tinged with concern. Jack nodded. We'll take care of it once we're sure we're safe. The crew gathered in the small living room, their faces weary but determined. Jack could feel the weight of their situation bearing down on him. They had made it to the cabin, but the Serpents were still out there, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until they had Aisha's family in their grasp. We need to find out who's behind all of this, Jack said, his voice firm. We need to take down the Serpents before they hurt anyone else. Diesel looked at him, his face hard. I'm with you, Jack. We'll finish this. But we need a plan. Jack glanced at the crew. They had all been through hell, but they weren't backing down. They were a family, and they weren't about to let anyone tear them apart. "We'll go after them one by one," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "We'll find out who's running the show and take them down. But we do it smart. We don't rush in blindly." Diesel nodded. "We'll get it done, Jack. We've got your back." Aisha looked up at Jack, her small face filled with uncertainty. Jack knelt down beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe here, Aisha," he said gently. "We won't let anything happen to you or your mom. I promise." Aisha didn't say anything, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes slowly start to fade. He hoped she believed him. The night stretched on, the quiet of the cabin only broken by the occasional crackle of the fire. The crew kept watch, taking turns standing guard while the others rested. Jack's mind was racing. They were one step closer to finding the answers they needed, but the Serpents were still out there. And Jack knew they would stop at nothing to destroy Aisha's family. He couldn't let that happen. As the night wore on, Jack finally allowed himself to close his eyes, though sleep didn't come easy. The weight of the situation hung heavy on his mind, but he couldn't afford to let up. He had a crew to protect, and a little girl who depended on him. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jack knew they would have to move quickly in the morning. They couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The Serpents would be looking for them, and they couldn't risk being caught off guard. The sun was just beginning to rise as Jack stood up, his body stiff from the restless sleep. He motioned for the crew to get ready. "We move out in 15 minutes, he said, his voice steady. "We're not waiting any longer. It's time to finish this." Diesel nodded, his face grim but resolute. "We'll take care of it, Jack. We'll make sure they don't hurt anyone else." Jack felt a surge of determination rise in him. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't backing down. Not now. Not ever.